welcome to Silent Queen's Rise. I'm so glad you're here. The morning Donovan Hale drove his 24-year-old girlfriend to the front door of what he called that sad little bakery Margaux inherited from her pathetic mother. He had a termination agreement, folded in the breast pocket of his Brunello Cucinelli jacket, and a smirk he hadn't bothered to hide since the divorce was finalized. He expected to find his ex-wife elbow-deep in flour, barely scraping by, humiliated by proximity to the woman he had chosen instead. What he did not expect, what neither of them could have possibly prepared for, was to discover that the crumbling, flour-dusted storefront on a forgotten block in Savannah, Georgia, was the front door to a distribution empire worth $47 million. And they certainly didn't know that the quiet, unhurried woman who answered the door in a plain linen apron had spent the last 4 years turning their cruelty into compound interest. Chapter 1. The Man Who Came to Gloat. Donovan Hale was 49 years old and had the kind of confidence that comes not from competence, but from having been told he was exceptional by people who needed something from him. He was the founder and managing partner of Hale Venture Group, a mid-sized private equity firm in Charleston that specialized in acquiring regional food and beverage brands, stripping them of their identity, and reselling the bones to larger conglomerates. He wore his silver at the temples like a merit badge. He kept his jaw sharp through twice-weekly sessions, with a personal trainer named Kyle and a dietary discipline that had not permitted bread since 2019. Sitting in the passenger seat of his pearl-white Range Rover, refusing as always to open her own door, was Kendall. Kendall was 24, a lifestyle content creator with a following of 200,000 people who believed she was an authority on intentional living. She wore a silk slip dress the color of champagne. Her left wrist was stacked with thin gold bangles that caught the morning light and threw small coins of gold across the leather interior every time she scrolled her phone. She had the practiced pout of someone who had monetized her appearance and the studied carelessness of someone who had never once been truly afraid. Their driver, a man named Eugene, who had worked for Donovan for 6 years and whose face had developed the precise blankness of someone who had witnessed too much and decided, feeling nothing was the safer architecture, came around the front of the car and opened Kendall's door. Kendall stepped onto the cracked Savannah sidewalk and looked at the storefront in front of her the way someone looks at a street puddle, with the mild, performative revulsion of a person whose discomfort has become content. "Babe," she said, tilting her head so her curtain of blonde hair swept to one side. "Is this it? It looks like it's been closed since, like, the 90s. The storefront did look modest. The sign above the door read Wren and Honey Artisan Bakery, in hand-painted lettering that had faded to a soft amber. The window display featured a tiered arrangement of ceramic cake stands and small potted herbs on a reclaimed wood shelf. There were no neon signs, no digital menu boards, no branded sandwich boards on the sidewalk announcing seasonal specials. Just a painted window, a hand-lettered door, and the very faint, almost architectural smell of brown butter and cardamom drifting out from somewhere deep inside. Donovan stepped out of the Range Rover and adjusted the cuffs of his jacket with the satisfied motion of a man who is dressed for a performance rather than a meeting. "This is it," he said. He glanced at the faded sign and made a short, dismissive sound in the back of his throat. She always romanticized this place. Her mother left it to her like it was some kind of treasure. He looked at Kendall. "I tried to tell her for years it was a liability. She's probably running it into the ground at this point." He reached into the car and retrieved a thin black portfolio. Inside it, a single-page licensing termination agreement that his attorneys at Roper and Finch had prepared at his specific instruction. 4 years ago, when Donovan had negotiated the divorce settlement, he had allowed Margaux to retain the bakery and its name. What his attorneys had inserted, buried on page 41 of the settlement document in language dense enough to discourage reading, was a clause granting Hale Venture Group a dormant licensing stake in any commercial expansion of the Wren and Honey brand. A stake Donovan had never expected to need, because he had never expected the bakery to amount to anything. He needed her to sign it away now, because it had amounted to something, and that something was about to become a very large problem. "Why do we have to be here in person?" Kendall asked, dropping her sunglasses onto her nose and looking up and down the quiet block with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist visiting a lesser civilization. "Because," Donovan said, placing one hand at the small of Kendall's back and steering her toward the door, "Margaux is the kind of woman who needs to understand the full picture before she signs anything. I need her To see us. I need her to see what she lost. He paused, one hand on the door. And I need her to understand that whatever she thinks she's built here, it's still got my name attached to it. He pushed open the door. A small brass bell above the frame announced their arrival with a sound so gentle it felt almost apologetic. Chapter 2. The bakery that was not a bakery. The front of the shop was small. 6 tables with marble tops and iron legs. A glass display case along one wall holding perhaps 24 pastries. Croissants laminated to an improbable architectural thinness. Individual tarts with fruit so precisely arranged, it looked deliberate as a painting. A single chocolate entremet under a glass dome that made Kendall pause involuntarily despite herself. The walls were original plaster painted a warm, deep ochre. On one wall hung a series of framed botanical illustrations, not the mass-produced kind that come in sets from home goods stores, but actual antique prints, their paper foxed with age, their frames mismatched in a way that looked entirely intentional. A record player sat on a shelf behind the counter, turning slowly, producing a low, warm jazz that filled the small room without demanding anything of it. Behind the counter, her back to the door, stood a woman, in a plain cream linen apron. She was 41 years old. She had the kind of bone structure that doesn't require maintenance. A clean jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair pulled up, with what appeared to be a single tortoiseshell clip. She was not wearing jewelry. She was writing something in a small leather notebook with a pencil, her attention entirely absorbed, and she did not immediately turn at the sound of the bell. When she did turn, there was no shock in her face, no flinch, no involuntary tightening around the eyes that would have told Donovan what he had come here hoping to see, which was evidence that she had not expected him, that he had caught her off guard, that she was less prepared than he was. Margaux Wren looked at Donovan Hale the way a person looks at a piece of furniture they've decided to donate. "Donovan," she said. Her voice was the low, even kind, the kind that doesn't adjust its volume or pitch based on who is in the room. She looked briefly at Kendall. "I thought you might come by eventually." Donovan pulled Kendall slightly closer, a gesture so automatic it barely registered as conscious. "Hello, Margaux. You look—" He glanced at the apron, the pencil, the modest surroundings. "Well rested," he finished, with a specific calibration of politeness designed to sound like an insult. Margaux didn't react. She set her pencil into the spine of the notebook and closed it. "Can I get either of you something? The cardamom cooing a man just came out of the oven 10 minutes ago." She glanced at Donovan. "Or I have a chamomile and honey if you're still avoiding anything with butter." Kendall opened her mouth, almost said yes, and then caught Donovan's expression and reorganized her face. "We're not here for pastry," Donovan said, placing the black portfolio on the marble counter with the practiced finality of a man who has done this before. "I'm going to keep this brief, Margaux. I know you don't have a lot of staff, and I don't want to take up your morning." Margaux looked at the portfolio. She didn't move toward it. "The Apex Southern Foods acquisition," Donovan said. And something changed almost imperceptibly in the air between them. "You know about it." It was not a question. "I read the trade press," Margaux said. Donovan cleared his throat. For 4 years, Hale Venture Group had been assembling a portfolio of regional artisan food brands for sale to Apex Southern Foods, a Nashville-based conglomerate that had been systematically acquiring heritage food businesses across the city. The deal, currently valued at $68 million, was scheduled to close in 19 days. Donovan's personal stake in the transaction, after fees and fund distributions, was approximately $9 million. The problem, the specific, acute $9 million problem, was that Apex's acquisition team had flagged the Wren and Honey licensing clause during their due diligence review. It was a ghost Donovan himself had inserted as a petty piece of insurance 4 years ago, never imagining it would come back to haunt him. Because Apex didn't just want the portfolio brands. They wanted Wren and Honey as the centerpiece acquisition, the flagship brand that justified the entire deal's premium valuation. Because Wren and Honey, it turned out, was not a small bakery. "I have a simple document," Donovan said, opening the portfolio and sliding a single page across the marble counter. "It formally terminates the dormant licensing stake Hale Venture holds in any commercial expansion of the Wren and Honey brand. It's a clean release. Sign it, and everything tied to this," he gestured around the small shop, "is unambiguously yours." He reached into the portfolio and produced an envelope. He set it beside the document. "There's a check inside for $25,000, Donovan said. "A goodwill payment for your time and for the inconvenience of the clause. I think that's more than fair." Kendall, who had been inspecting the chocolate entremet under the glass dome, with the focused attention of someone trying not to look like they wanted it, turned at this and offered Margaux a smile so precisely calibrated it could have been installed with software. "It's incredibly generous," Kendall said. She had the slightly elevated diction of someone who has recently started saying incredibly in place of really. "Donovan has been so stressed about this. It's really a simple fix. Take the money, sign the paper, and then this whole chapter is just done, closed." She tilted her head. "You could probably use it for renovations. This space has real potential with the right investment." The shop was quiet for a moment except for the record player. Margaux looked at the check in the envelope. She looked at the single-page document. She looked at Kendall. Then she looked at Donovan with an expression. So still, it was almost scientific, the look of someone measuring something rather than feeling it. 25,000, Margaux said softly. She picked up the envelope, turned it over once in her hands, and set it back on the counter. "Donovan, you drove to Savannah on a Wednesday morning. The document requires an in-person signature for notarization," Donovan said. "You have 3 notaries on retainer at Roper and Finch," Margaux said. "You could have overnighted this with a FedEx prepaid envelope, and it would have cost you $11. She folded her hands on the counter. "You drove here because you wanted to see the look on my face when you handed me $25,000 for something you think is worthless." Donovan's jaw tightened by a degree. "The licensing clause is a formality," he said. "The licensing clause," Margaux said, "is the reason the Apex acquisition is currently on a 2-week extension." A silence entered the room that was qualitatively different from the silence before it. Chapter 3. What the due diligence team found. Donovan recovered his composure with the speed of a man who has practiced composure as a professional skill. "Apex flagged it as a procedural item," he said. "Their legal team wants clean documentation. That's all this is." "That's not what their managing director told me," Margaux said. The composure lasted another 3 seconds. "Excuse me?" Donovan said. Margaux walked to the end of the counter and lifted the hinged section to step out from behind it. She moved with the unhurried ease of someone who has been comfortable in this space for a very long time. She gestured toward one of the marble-top tables near the window. "Sit down, Donovan," she said, not unkindly, but with the specific tone of someone who's decided that the performance is over. He sat. Kendall sat beside him, her posture subtly less confident than it had been 60 seconds ago. Margaux sat across from them. She did not have the document. She did not have the envelope. She rested her hands flat on the cool marble and spoke with the calm of a woman who had been rehearsing this specific conversation in her head for approximately 4 years, not because she was nervous, but because she had wanted to get the sequencing exactly right. 3 years ago, Margaux said, Wren and Honey opened a second location in Charleston. "I saw," Donovan said, his voice controlled. 18 months ago, we opened a production kitchen in Augusta, not for retail, for wholesale. We supply 12 hotel breakfast programs across Georgia and South Carolina. We have an exclusive contract with a regional airline catering service. We supply 4 hospital networks whose nutrition directors were tired of serving patients factory bread." She paused. "Last quarter, wholesale revenue exceeded retail for the first time." Donovan blinked. 8 months ago, Margaux continued, I was approached by a brand development consultant who had been retained by Apex Southern Foods. They had seen the wholesale numbers and were interested in what they called the infrastructure behind the aesthetic. They wanted to know whether Wren and Honey was a brand or a bakery. She looked at Donovan evenly. "I told them it was both." They agreed. "You've been in contact with Apex," Donovan said. His voice had taken on a slightly hollow quality, like a room where the furniture has been removed. "I have been in contract discussions with Apex," Margaux said with the specific emphasis of someone who understands the distinction. "For 6 months. She reached into the front pocket of her apron and placed her phone, screen up, on the marble table. On it was an email chain. The most recent entry, timestamped the previous morning, was from a woman named Patricia Greenfield, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Apex Southern Foods. Donovan leaned forward and read. The email confirmed that Apex's board had voted to restructure the acquisition. Rather than purchasing the Hale venture portfolio as a bundled transaction, they had elected to pursue Wren and Honey as a standalone acquisition. The valuation figure at the bottom of the email, in plain 12-point font, was $47 million. Donovan's face went through several colors in the span of about 4 seconds. "They restructured," he said, as though if he named the thing calmly enough it might become a different thing. When their legal team discovered the licensing clause, Margaux said, they didn't see a procedural item. They saw a cloud on the title of the asset they actually wanted. So they did what any sophisticated acquisition team does when they find a complication. They went back to the source. She picked up her phone and returned it to her apron pocket. They came to me directly. 6 months ago. Kendall had stopped performing entirely. She sat with her champagne-colored dress and her gold bangles, and her hands folded in her lap, and she looked between Margaux and Donovan with the expression of someone who has shown up to what they thought was a dinner party and slowly realized it was a sentencing hearing. The check, Donovan said. The word came out quietly. $25,000, Margaux said, for a stake in a company that is closing a $47 million acquisition. She didn't say it with pleasure. She said it the way you state a math error, simply so it can be acknowledged and moved past. Donovan, you didn't read the growth reports. You didn't read the wholesale contracts. You didn't read the catering agreements. She looked at him steadily. You drove here in your Range Rover with an envelope of money to watch me feel small. You were so focused on making sure I understood what I had lost that you never once asked what I had built. Donovan reached into the breast pocket of his Brunello Cucinelli jacket and pulled out his phone. He dialed, held it to his ear. His attorney, Martin Foss at Roper & Finch, answered on the second ring, which told Margaux he had been waiting for the call. Martin, Donovan said, tell me the Apex restructuring is an opening position. Tell me they're still obligated to the portfolio deal under the original LOI. The pause on the other end of the line was the kind that carries information before a single word is spoken. Donovan, Martin said. His voice was careful in the way attorney voices get careful when they are delivering news they have already delivered once and been made to repeat. The original LOI was conditional on clean IP across all acquired entities. The Wren and Honey licensing clause created a title defect on what Apex has since determined is their priority asset. They exercised the restructuring provision in Section 14 of the LOI. It's within their rights. A pause. And Donovan. They filed the restructured LOI with the Tennessee Secretary of State yesterday. It's on record. Can we challenge it? On what grounds? Martin said. The clause is legitimate. The restructuring provision is legitimate. And if we challenge it, we antagonize the only buyer we have for the rest of the portfolio, which they can now walk away from entirely if they choose. Another pause, longer this time. I've been trying to reach you since yesterday evening. Donovan lowered the phone. He didn't hang up. He just lowered it to the table, and Martin's voice continued in the small, distant register of a man, speaking carefully into a phone no one is holding. Chapter 4. The Years in Between. There was a moment then where the room held its breath. Kendall broke it. Not with words. She made a sound, a small pressurized exhale, and put both hands flat on the table in front of her, the way people do when they need something solid. Donovan, she said, her voice stripped of its content creator softness. The Highlands house, the one we put the deposit on. She was referring to a property in Cashiers, North Carolina, that Donovan had told her they would purchase after the Apex transaction closed. She had already posted 3 photographs of the exterior to her followers under a caption about new chapters. Donovan didn't look at her. Margaux looked at Donovan. She studied him with the particular quality of attention she had spent 4 years cultivating. Not cold, not vengeful, just clear. The way you look at something you have finally stopped being afraid of. 4 years ago, Margaux said, her voice quiet and without decoration, you sat across from me in a conference room at Roper & Finch. You had 4 attorneys and I had 1. You had 48 hours before told me that Wren and Honey was a vanity project, that it would never scale, that I was being sentimental about my mother's business, and it was costing both of us money. She paused. You told me to take the building, take the name, and consider myself fortunate that you were letting me keep it at all. Donovan said nothing. I signed the settlement because I wasn't interested in fighting you, Margaux said. I was interested in working. She folded her hands. My mother opened this bakery in 1987. She made 9 varieties of bread. She knew every customer's name and their standing order and which of their children had a nut allergy. When she died, she left me a building, $400 in the operating account, and a recipe binder with the spiral coming unspun. Margaux looked briefly at the window, the faded sign, the morning light falling across the display case. I spent the first year after the divorce just keeping the lights on, getting up at 4 in the morning and going to sleep at 9 at night and doing it again. I didn't have time to be hurt. She didn't say this with self-pity. She said it the way people describe weather, as a condition they move through. The second year, I hired a pastry chef named Odette who had trained in Lyon and wanted to come home to the South. Between us, we rebuilt the menu from scratch. I started calling on hotel food and beverage managers. I drove to Charleston twice a month with sample boxes in the back seat. I wore out 2 sets of tires. Margaux glanced at the display case. The third year, I signed the first hotel contract, then a second, then the airline. She paused. The fourth year, a woman from Apex Southern Foods called me to say they had been eating our croissants every morning at the Beaufort Marriott for 6 months and wanted to know who owned the brand. Donovan's hands were on the marble table. He was staring at them. "I want you to understand something," Margaux said, and her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, but more deliberate. The way people speak when they want the words to land without ambiguity. "I did not build this to punish you. I built it because I had something worth building, and no one was going to stop me, and I am my mother's daughter." She let that sit for a moment. "The fact that it is currently dismantling your acquisition deal is not the design. It is a coincidence with excellent timing." There was a window behind Margaux's head, and through it the Savannah morning continued. A delivery truck, double parked across the street, 2 women walking a pair of identically small dogs, a church bell somewhere in the middle distance going through the hour. Donovan finally looked up. His face had undergone a specific kind of rearrangement. Not broken, exactly, but reorganized. The architecture of confidence that he wore so consistently it had become indistinguishable from his actual face was simply not there anymore. What was underneath it was older and less certain. "How much," he said, "does Apex want for the licensing clause termination?" "They don't want your licensing clause terminated," Margaux said. "They want to acquire my company. Those are different things." "I know that," Donovan said, and his voice cracked just slightly at the edge of it. "I mean, is there a deal? Can I be included? A finder's fee? A transitional consulting role? Something?" Margaux looked at him for a long time. "You came here today," she said, "to have me sign away any commercial value attached to this brand for $25,000. You brought your girlfriend to watch." She glanced briefly at Kendall, who had the grace, at least, to look at the table. "You wanted to watch me accept a diminishment. That was the purpose of this trip." "Margaux, I'm not angry," she said. And it was true. There was no anger in her voice. Anger requires the other person to still have power over you, and Donovan Hale did not have that. "But I am not in the business of rewarding the specific kind of cruelty that dresses itself up as generosity." She stood. Chapter 5. The full architecture of the thing. Donovan didn't move immediately. He sat at the marble table, with the check in its envelope on the counter behind him, and the single-page termination agreement he had brought from Charleston, and the portfolio, and all the careful, expensive preparation of a man who had been certain he understood the board he was playing on. His phone, still lying on the table, continued to emit the small sound of Martin Foss speaking into the void. Kendall stood first. She did it without announcement. She picked up her purse from where she had hung it on the back of the iron chair, settled it over one shoulder, and looked at Donovan with an expression that contained a complicated and not entirely unsympathetic mixture of disgust and self-preservation. "I need to think," she said. It was directed at Donovan, but she was looking at the door. "Kendall," Donovan said. I'm not leaving," she said, and the repetition of the word indicated that she was, in fact, leaving. "I just need some air. I need to call my manager." She gestured vaguely at the room, at the situation, at the general structural collapse of the morning. "This is a lot of information, and I need to process it somewhere that isn't." She looked around the warm ochre room, the record player, the tiers of precise pastry behind the glass. She couldn't finish the sentence because the room was objectively extremely pleasant, and naming it as the problem would have required her to acknowledge that the problem was not the room. She walked to the door. The small brass bell announced her exit with the same gentle sound it had announced her entrance. Donovan looked at the door for a moment. Then he looked at Margaux. "She'll come back," he said. Margaux said nothing. He reached out and picked up the termination agreement from the counter where he had placed it. He looked at it. It was a single page. It had been prepared by 4 attorneys at $280 an hour. It was, at this moment, worth precisely what the paper had cost to print. He set it back down. "My fund," he said. "If Apex walks from the portfolio deal, your fund loses the bundled transaction premium," Margaux said, returning behind the counter, picking up her pencil. opening her small leather notebook to the page she had been writing on when they arrived. The individual brands are still viable on their own terms. You'll find buyers. It will take longer and the multiple will be lower, but the businesses are real. She looked up at him over the notebook. You built some real businesses, Donovan. You're good at finding things with bones and selling them before anyone notices the structure. She paused. You just couldn't tell the difference between something with bones and something with a living heart. Donovan stood. The Brunello Cucinelli jacket, which had fit him with such authority 2 hours ago, seemed to sit differently on him now. Not wrong, exactly. Just no longer doing the work it had been purchased to do. He picked up the portfolio. He picked up the envelope with the check. He left the termination agreement on the counter. At the door, he stopped. He turned back. Margaux was already writing in the notebook, her pencil moving in small, unhurried strokes. Margaux, he said. She looked up. Your mother's recipe binder, he said. The one with the broken spiral. He paused. I threw it away. When we were packing up your mother's things, I thought it was clutter. The shop was very quiet. I know, Margaux said. Donovan nodded once, as though she had confirmed something. He opened the door. The brass bell rang softly, and the Savannah morning let him back into it. Chapter 6. What the Silence Held. For a few minutes after the door closed, Margaux stood at the counter and let the quiet of the shop settle back around her like something she owned. The record player reached the end of its side. The needle rode the run-out groove in a gentle rhythmic loop. Margaux came out from behind the counter, lifted the arm, flipped the record, and set the needle back down. A new song started, something older, a little slower, with a piano line that moved like morning light across a wood floor. She walked into the kitchen. The back kitchen was where the real business happened, and it looked like it. It was not picturesque. It was a professional operation. 6-burner commercial range, 2 deck ovens, a walk-in cooler with a temperature log on a clipboard by the door, a stainless steel work table the length of one wall. On it, cooling on wire racks, were 48 pain de mie loaves for the hotel delivery that afternoon. Beside them, a sheet pan of coing a man in their individual rings, just beginning to firm at the edges. Odette was back here portioning brioche dough with the focus of a person who does not portion brioche dough while thinking about other things. She looked up when Margaux walked in. They leave? Odette asked. She was from Baton Rouge originally, and had the particular economy of speech of someone who grew up in a place where the weather does what it does regardless of what you say about it. They left, Margaux said. Odette looked at her for a moment, making a quick private assessment. Queen's ready in 10, she said, and went back to the dough. Margaux put on a fresh apron and washed her hands at the sink, letting the water run cold over the inside of her wrists, the way her mother had taught her to do when the oven heat had been building up all morning. Her phone was in her apron pocket. It buzzed once. She dried her hands and looked. A message from Patricia Greenfield at Apex. Final paperwork filed this morning with State Registry. We're set for the 16th. See you in Nashville. Below it, a second message from Margaux's attorney, a woman in Savannah named Deirdre Okafor, whose office was 6 blocks away, and who had been working on this transaction since before Donovan Hale had ever thought to dial a single Charleston hotel's food and beverage director. Wire instructions confirmed. First tranche hits your account on the 17th per the schedule. Congratulations, Margaux. Your mother would be furious we didn't charge more. Margaux read both messages twice. Then she set the phone face down on the work table and picked up a bench scraper and went to help Odette finish the morning's work. At a certain point, while they were loading the hotel delivery boxes, Odette said, without looking up, You ever going to tell me what that licensing clause thing was actually worth? I told you, Margaux said. Enough. Enough like replace the deck oven enough, or enough like the building next door comes up for sale next spring and we don't have to ask anyone for a loan. Odette set down a box. The whole building, she said. The whole building, Margaux said, and maybe the one behind it. Odette picked the box back up. All right then, she said. And that was all she said. Later that afternoon, after the hotel delivery had gone out, and the retail case had been restocked for the second time, and the last customer of the day had left with a paper bag of sourdough. Tucked under one arm, Margaux locked the front door and turned the sign and stood for a moment in the empty shop. The light at that hour came through the front window at a low angle, the way it only does in October, and it fell across the display case and the iron chairs and the botanical prints on the wall and made everything look briefly ancient and quietly lit, the way certain things look when you've stopped holding your breath around them. On the counter, exactly where Donovan had left it, was the single-page termination agreement. Margaux picked it up. She read it once, though she didn't need to. She had reviewed the draft when her attorney forwarded it 3 days ago. Because Deirdre Okafor did not allow her clients to be surprised by documents they hadn't already read. She folded it twice, neatly, and carried it to the small office at the back of the shop, where her mother's recipe binder used to sit on the desk before Donovan threw it away. She had reconstructed the binder. That first year, before the hotels and the airline and the production kitchen and Odette and any of it, she had spent 7 months calling every person who had ever eaten at Wren and Honey while her mother was alive. She had driven to 3 different counties to sit in people's kitchens and watch them try to replicate things from memory. She had written it all down in a new binder, organized it, tested every recipe, marked the ones that needed correction with a red pencil. The reconstruction was not perfect. A few things were gone for good. But most of it was there, in her handwriting, on the desk where it belonged. She put the termination agreement in the recycling bin. She turned off the office light, put on her coat, picked up her keys, and walked through the kitchen, where the ovens were still warm from the day, and out the back door into the small parking lot, where her car was waiting. The evening was cool. The kind of cool that comes in off the Georgia coastal plain in autumn and smells faintly of pine and river, and something older underneath both. She stood for a moment before getting in, just long enough to let the air do what it does. She had built something. She had rebuilt something, and now, on the 17th of the month, the first tranche of what her work was actually worth would arrive in her account, not as a vindication. She hadn't needed vindication, but simply as mathematics. As proof, legible in numbers, that the thing she had poured herself into for 4 years had been real the whole time. She got into the car. She drove home, and for the first time in a very long time, the drive felt exactly the length it was. If this story found you in a quiet moment, if you know what it means to rebuild something in the dark, without applause, without anyone watching, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The women in these stories don't ask for permission to rise, and neither should you. See you in the next one.